book discussion, Livewired by David Eagleman, a book about neuroscience, neuroplasticity, and a very inspirational story about how nature has evolved into an intelligent system called what we call the brain, and a very adaptive system that we call an organism, and how that organism, our bodies, can be expanded into social change, how smart contracts can have a crucial role in playing in what David Eagleman says a transmission of natural know-how into engineering know-how, in particular how we can solve infrastructure problems with smart contracts that are inspired by neuroplasticity. This is the Not Even Wrong podcast. It's March 6th, 2021. This is Krim Delko. Today is a Saturday. There's no update. So let's get right into it. This is, first of all, a book discussion. I just finished Livewired by David Eagleman. I will then expand into a very interesting connection. And this is the most exciting thing when you study one field, read a book, and then you connect know-how from those two seemingly unrelated pieces, and you create a new idea. This is really important and interesting. So first, the book discussion. Livewired is about neuroplasticity. Eagleman is a neuroscientist at Stanford. He thinks about the brain, and he particularly thinks about how the brain is organized with relationship to our body. So the brain is the operating system that helps us navigate through nature. And the main story of the book is that our brain is able to adapt to data that comes from our sensors, which are our skin, our eyes, our nose, our ears. And what's most exciting is that the sensors are such that they're shaping the data. So the ear is in a way that it can collect airwaves so we can hear. And then the nervous system, which collects those airwaves, is shaped in a way that it can decode from the airwaves information that we then call hearing. Now, these nerves can also readjust themselves to, let's say, get sensory data from the skin, which is touchy or touchy-feely, and then actually interpret that data also. So what Eagleman is saying is that particularly at a younger age, our brain is plastic in the sense that it can morph, it can change relative to the input that it's getting. And for example, he's talking about a child that has half of his brain removed because of an illness, and still there is this amazing readaptation of the brain. The brain adapts to only having half available to it, and is able to the kid is able to function. So these are massive, interesting stories, and Eagleman goes along, and he's a very good writer, of course, so he tells the story in a very interesting way. But the main message here is that you have the ability to readjust your neurons. They adapt to whatever is given to them from the outside. He also talks about, let's say, a couple of other interesting concepts, such as, for example, he thinks that our neurons are literally competing for resources within the brain, the resources being certain proteins that the neurons need to proliferate. So it's kind of the currency of the brain, if you want. And he thinks that therefore there is a real land grab in the brain, that, for example, he's explaining what dreaming is for. Dreaming is meant to stimulate our visual cortex during sleep so that other sensors don't win over our neurons in the brain, that our visual cortex, which is very important for our survival, survives. So dreaming is kind of like a simulated game where we see during sleep. It's completely useless what we see. The most important thing is that we stimulate our visual cortex so it doesn't get taken over by other senses. And he talks about, of course, back in the Stone Age, we didn't have light for 12 hours a day, and that was a long time that other senses such as the skin and the hearing and all those senses could have taken over from the visual cortex, and therefore maybe diminished its ability to function. And Eagleman is saying that his thesis is that the dreaming is a tool for our visual cortex to survive the competitive game. So these are unbelievably interesting ideas. Some of it are speculative. Eagleman is also, I've seen him actually a few years ago at a conference with VMware, where he spoke about how we can feel the stock market by, let's say, imagine you put a vest on and you just simply watch the stock market, and you just always say, if this happens, the stock goes down. If this happens, the stock goes up. So you kind of you just get constant input for let's say 6 months, every day for 8 hours during the stock market hours. You keep getting this input that there's, let's say, you have a news, you follow, let's say, Bloomberg News, for example, and then you just say, okay, this news item just came out, the stock market went up. This news item came out, the stock market went down. And then over time, you start feeling the stock market. And then when you see news, you already feel what's going to happen, because your brain is going to readjust, to replasticate. I don't know if that's a word, but remorph into a stock market detection mechanism, even though, of course, we're not evolved for something like that. But the point being, our neurons are extremely plastic. They can adjust to information coming from all kinds of different places in all kinds of different ways. I think everybody who's learned, let's say, a new sport, like I learned jiu-jitsu a few years ago, I'm learning surfing right now. You realize how you start feeling things, how you start, we call that muscle memory, of course, particularly in martial arts. These are things that we have words for, but we can't really explain it. And this is exactly what's going on, that our brain is starting to adjust neurons or information coming to our brain, to neurons that might not have had any function before, or a very different function, and now all of a sudden have a function of, let's say, defending yourself by using jiu-jitsu, or by surfing and not getting wiped out by a wave. You start feeling the pressure of the water, the wind, you start getting all this information. I've always made that point also, let's say, when I skied. I figured the amount of math that I'm doing while I'm skiing down the Palisades in Squaw Valley, for example, when it's very steep and maybe icy, and the eyes are looking at, let's say, you detect potential ice, and then you see bumps and things like that, or the light changes and you're a bit more careful. So the amount of math you have to do to come down a very steep terrain in skiing is amazing, and you're able to do it, guess what? Because again, your neurons have adapted and they're able to do the math. Another interesting exercise I've done recently is I'm doing some physiotherapy for my meniscus, and I was asked to balance on a foot, and that's not a big problem. Now, guess what? Close your eyes and balance on a foot, not possible. So that means that we're balancing, of course, with our eyes, using information from our eyes to then manage the muscles that help balance the foot and the whole body. So these are all things that we all know. We have instinctive knowledge. I think Eagleman just puts it out there in plain English, and that is really what's interesting. The most inspiring thing, though, comes at the end, and this is another lesson why one should always read books till the end, even if they sometimes get a bit boring. And I have to say, Eagleman's book got a little boring over time because it keeps saying the same thing. But here is a very interesting thing. At the end, he talks about, like, I think he's doing kind of like an outlook kind of thing, where he talks about what could happen in the future based on this type of knowledge. And he talks about a very interesting thing where he said we always used let's say, engineering practices to influence neuroscience. So we used engineering such as MRIs and any general, let's say, computer science and things like that to help neuroscience. Well, how about it goes the other way? Neuroscience could help engineering. And he talks about the plasticity of robots, for example. He talks about the wolf and the rover on Mars. The wolf that gets caught in a trap, loses a leg, can adapt, can survive even with 3 legs. The rover on Mars gets stuck. There's something wrong. One little piece doesn't work, and that's it. He just dies up there on Mars. Can't readjust because he's not built. He's not created in a plasticity type engineering architecture type of way. So he's then talking about something, and here's the punchline. He's talking about the ability of societies or communities to start decentralized forming or adapting to the environment. And this is unbelievably interesting because I'm just working right now on the concept of decentralized energy and decentralized contracts based on smart contracts on the Ethereum blockchain. and the possibility to use those types of technologies to have communities adapt to the environment without central agents, for example, in the case of energy, without utilities. There's a very concrete example here, and that is Texas. Texas has a problem. California is another one where there's constant problems with nature, that communities are constantly fighting with the central utilities about their needs to deal with nature. For example, in California, it's wildfires. In Texas, it's extreme weather, hurricanes, things like that, constant outages. All these kinds of things lead to this situation where people basically are living in areas where they're unhappy about the way they're being served by central utilities. Now, Eagleman is saying there is a possibility. He's not mentioning this particular example. He's more general. He's saying there is a potential that our communities, our cities, our people living in areas start remorphing themselves into new organizational forms based on the environment, and not having central top-down type organized urban planning or anything like that, but it's more organic, coming from bottom up. And this is exactly what I'm working on with these smart contracts. Just as a side note, this is a very long-term project. It's not necessarily relevant for Orange Capital Partners right now, but I could see myself as an investor in startups that solve these problems. It's unbelievably interesting to me that you could have, let's say, you could have a village in Texas that says, you know what, we've had it with this central utility. What we're going to do is we're going to set out a smart contract which says basically the following: each house is going to pay $10,000, and the contract is such that if everybody chips in $10,000, then a contractor can redeem from everybody the $10,000 and build an infrastructure that connects all the houses and maybe puts in, let's say, a Tesla battery and a solar system and things like that. So all these houses are interconnected and can then, through another smart contract or an extension of the auto bidder technology that Tesla has, could then allow the houses to trade energy with each other when there are problems. The key problem here is, how do you solve the centralization problem of your building infrastructure where, let's say, I don't know, there's 100 houses in this community. How we would do it is, we would have a town hall, there would be the mayor would organize the whole thing, pay for the construction, then the construction would be managed by some central utility or the municipality or things like that. And the problem with these things is corruption, delays, things like that. And the fundamental, like the outcome here, in my view, or the great outcome that we could see, is that we could now have a decentralized way, people writing a contract saying, I'm going to pay $10,000. The contract is only good if all the other 99 houses also pay $10,000. So we have 100 times $10,000, which is $1 million, and that is enough for a contractor, Tesla, to come in, to build the factories, put in the power walls, put in the mega pack, and make sure that this community of 100 houses has energy off the grid all the time. Maybe it can be adjusted to the grid also, but fundamentally it is available to them. And the key here is that you have a decentralized approach. There's no corruption here. There's nothing. Of course, the bidding process has to be also done in a way that the contractor has incentive to make it at the most optimal cost benefit way. And then also there has to be a certain management in the contract, or in the smart contract, a certain clause or an algorithm that says that, of course, the system has to be maintained. So let's say you get paid a certain fee or also a penalty, so you get subtracted from the $1 million that you made as a contractor if things break down within the first 5 years, 8 years, 10 years. Things like warranty could be all embedded in the smart contract script. So to summarize, this is a beautiful example of a decentralized way how communities can adapt to environmental challenges. This is exactly what David Eagleman is talking about in his book, Livewired. And this is what I've come across in studying Ethereum and the smart contract technology platform based on the Ethereum blockchain. And the beautiful thing is, when two things come together, that's when really the magic happens. When you see that from different angles, the same problem gets tackled in a similar way. David Eagleman is obviously more, let's say, I would call it more epistemological, in the sense that he is more abstract, thinking about potential applications of his ideas. And Ethereum This is in particular a course that I took at EDX from Berkeley, that they actually are talking about this in the blockchain course. I'm right now in the process of reading papers and organizing myself, talking to the community to see what is about the actual implementation of this smart contract technology to help build more organic infrastructure. So to summarize again, this episode was primarily meant to be a summary of Livewired by David Eagleman, a book I highly recommend. But it's also a little bit of an extension to an idea that came across to me through a course I took in the EDX course about blockchains from Berkeley, and the connection between those ideas and a central idea that comes across in the conclusion of Livewired. And this is the beauty: when two things come together, that's when magic happens. Thank you.